My name is Emma, and I had just turned 30 when my older sister decided I wasn't entitled to any part of our grandmother's final wishes. On the morning everything unraveled, I picked up the phone to confirm what time I should arrive for the reading of the will. Her laughter came through the line immediately, a sharp and cutting sound that she reserves for moments when she believes victory is already hers. She informed me that the meeting had taken place the previous day, that I had completely missed my opportunity, and that I should probably get comfortable with the idea of accepting whatever scraps might be left over. According to her, the house and the significant money were already spoken for and fully handled. I could almost see her expression through the phone, relaxed and smug, as though she had finally succeeded in pushing me out of a competition I hadn't even realized we were running. In the background behind her voice, I could hear the muffled sounds of family members talking, the clinking of plates, and the scraping of chairs being moved. They were all gathered together, and I had not been invited. What my sister had no way of knowing was that several days before her triumphant phone call, our grandmother's attorney had already visited me in person. He had sat down across from me at a quiet table in Hartford, folded his hands carefully on the surface between us, and walked me through a very different version of her will. In that version, I was not the person scrambling for leftovers. So while she went on about how you snooze and you lose, I simply sat there with the phone pressed against my ear, listening without interrupting and letting her talk herself into a false sense of security. Somewhere out in the postal system, a certified envelope bearing my name was working its way through sorting centers and delivery trucks, moving closer to both of us with every passing hour. Months before that phone call happened, my entire world had already contracted down to the dimensions of my grandmother's brick house on the east side of Hartford. I was 30 years old and doing part-time graphic design work that allowed me to operate remotely from almost anywhere. For that particular stretch of time, my daily schedule revolved entirely around her oxygen machine and the better hours she experienced in the afternoons. I took on campaigns I could manage from my laptop while sitting at her dining table, and I arranged client meetings around the schedule of nurse visits and medication times. It never felt like a sacrifice to me. It felt like the absolute least I could do for the woman who had stepped in with rent money on more than one occasion when I was too stubborn to ask my parents for help. Most mornings I parked my car on the street outside, walked up the cracked front steps, and let myself in using the spare key that Grandma had asked me to copy when her health first started to decline. I checked the whiteboard hanging by the refrigerator, where the hospice nurse left detailed notes about medication schedules and pain levels throughout the day, and then I headed down the narrow hallway to her bedroom. Her bed had been repositioned to face the window that overlooked the sidewalk because she enjoyed watching people walk their dogs and children heading off to school in the morning. Even with an intravenous line taped to the back of her hand and a blanket draped across her lap, her eyes remained sharp and alert. She still wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck and insisted on knowing exactly which pills she was taking and when they were being administered. Grandma had spent several decades working as a library assistant. Organizing chaos had been her professional responsibility, and that part of her personality never really retired when her body did. She tracked her own medical appointments with precision, remembered the name of every nurse who walked through her door, and asked follow-up questions that sometimes made doctors pause and check their notes before answering. It was obvious to anyone paying attention that she fully understood what was happening to her body. My role in all of this was the softer kind of work. I refilled her water glass, adjusted pillows behind her back, and figured out how to stream old movies on the small television set positioned at the foot of her bed. On good days, we played dominoes together, and she teased me for overthinking every single move I made. On the difficult days, I sat quietly in the chair beside her while she dozed, answering work emails with one hand while keeping my other hand resting on the bed rail so that she would know I was still there when she woke up confused. The hospice nurse, Carmen Torres, came by twice every day without fail. She moved through the house with the steady and unhurried calm of someone who had witnessed this stage of life many times before. She checked vital signs, asked about pain levels, documented everything on her tablet in real time, and always made absolutely certain that Grandma heard the plan for the day. Out in the hallway afterward, Carmen would quietly tell me which changes I should watch for, and when I should not hesitate to call her in the middle of the night if something felt wrong. My sister lived only 20 minutes away in a newer neighborhood with tidy lawns and matching mailboxes at the end of every driveway. On paper, she was the more responsible one, with a full-time job that came with a serious title, a carefully curated social media presence, and a life that appeared planned out down to the smallest detail. In reality, our actual roles at Grandma's house were completely reversed. I was there most days, moving in and out of the rooms around Carmen and the home health aide who helped with bathing. My sister appeared only in bursts, brief and unpredictable. When my sister did visit, the entire energy in the room would shift immediately. She came in fast, her shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floors, her tote bag dropping heavily onto the chair by the closet. She talked more to the air around her than directly to Grandma, going on about late meetings at work and demanding clients, complaining that she never had any time left over to cook a proper meal. Her phone stayed clutched in her hand the entire time, lighting up repeatedly with alerts that she refused to silence. She always said she wished she could be there more often, that work was absolutely insane right now, and barely gave her a moment to breathe. Grandma listened to all of this without interrupting once. Her gaze, though, did not follow the thread of the story my sister was telling. Instead, it followed the way my sister's attention kept sliding away from her face and drifting toward the dresser in the corner, where an old jewelry box sat next to framed photos from family trips decades ago. It followed the quick glance my sister made toward the small wall safe that was half hidden behind hanging coats in the open closet. It caught every seemingly casual question about bills, insurance policies, and utility accounts, all things my sister had never cared about before this moment. Later on, when we were alone again, Grandma would ask me practical questions that sounded harmless on the surface. She wanted to know whether anyone else had keys to the house, whether I ever left my copy sitting on a hook by the door or hidden under the mat outside, how often delivery people came up onto the porch when I was not there to receive packages, and whether the Doorbell camera app had been working properly on my phone lately. She did not tell me what to think about any of this. She simply collected my answers and stored them away somewhere behind those sharp, tired eyes. At the time, I told myself she was just being cautious in the way that old and vulnerable people are when their house holds a lifetime of accumulated memories. Only later did I come to understand that she was already watching patterns, not just isolated moments. She was paying very close attention to the people who were acting like they were already entitled to whatever she would eventually leave behind. It did not take very long for things to start feeling distinctly off inside that house. The first time I really noticed something wrong, I was rinsing out a coffee mug at the kitchen sink while Grandma rested quietly in her room. By the window on the counter sat a small ceramic dish, where she kept 2 rings she wore on good days and a pair of clip-on earrings she saved for church. That particular afternoon, one of the rings was gone. I told myself she might have worn it earlier and left it somewhere else in the house. I finished washing the dishes and said nothing about it to anyone. 2 days later, the second ring was also missing, and the earrings had been nudged toward the back of the dish, as if someone's fingers had moved through them quickly and carelessly. My stomach tightened in a way I immediately recognized from years of watching my sister bend reality to suit whatever story she happened to be selling at the time. Grandma noticed my eyes lingering on the empty dish, but she did not comment on it. She just adjusted her blanket across her lap and asked me to bring her the small notebook that she kept in her nightstand drawer. It looked like any cheap list pad you might buy at a drugstore, with lines filled in with dates and brief notes written in her neat and precise handwriting. I did not ask her what she was writing down or why. Later, I would come to understand that she was building a written record of everything that was happening around her. My sister's visits changed noticeably around the same time all of this was occurring. She still arrived in short and hurried bursts, but now she carried envelopes and manila folders with her instead of flowers or magazines. She would lay them out carefully on the dining table and explain that she was helping our mother with all the boring paperwork now that Grandma was too sick to handle these responsibilities herself. Property tax notices, insurance statements, utility bills, all the mail that had lived quietly in drawers for years suddenly became urgent and important. From my chair by the window, I watched her unfold each page with deliberate slowness and anchor her arguments to the numbers printed on them. She traced the assessed value of the house with her fingertip, circled various fees in pen, and underlined words like penalty and past due with heavy strokes. Her talking points were always carefully framed as concern for the family. She would say that an old house costs a tremendous amount to maintain, that it would be deeply unfair to leave our mother burdened with expensive repairs and back payments, and that there were smarter and more practical ways to handle things if everyone would just stop being emotional and listen to reason. Grandma's face gave away almost nothing during these conversations. Her eyes, though, followed every single move my sister made. She asked simple and direct questions about what actually needed to be paid and when. My sister answered fast and confidently, effortlessly slipping herself into the role of the only person in the family who truly understood money and responsibility. Outside of those conversations, smaller objects throughout the house began to vanish without explanation. A silver bracelet disappeared from the dresser, leaving behind a clean ring in the accumulated dust where it had been sitting. A velvet case that used to hold a brooch turned up completely empty in a laundry basket someone had carried downstairs. The jewelry stand on the vanity grew barer with each passing week, hooks that had never been empty in my memory now holding only air. When I asked lightly if she had moved things somewhere safer, Grandma said calmly that she did not want too many valuables sitting out at once while people were coming and going. Her tone was calm and measured, but her knuckles were white around the pen she was holding in her hand. Then she asked if I could help her with something on her phone. The Doorbell camera app was already open when I took it from her. I mostly used the camera to see when deliveries arrived during the day. The recent history on the app showed my sister's car pulling up to the house on multiple evenings when I was not scheduled to be there. Short visits that lasted less than an hour each time. On several of the video clips, she went inside carrying one bag and came out later with the same bag hanging noticeably heavier and lower on her shoulder. Grandma did not tell me what to think about those timestamps or what they might mean. She simply asked me to show her how to save individual videos to the phone and how to send them to a contact she had labeled Hoffman Law in her address book. I assumed it was related to estate planning and told myself she was just being thorough in the way she had always been with paperwork. She reminded me that she had worked around documents and filing systems her entire adult life and that she knew exactly how to keep a paper trail when something felt off to her. Carmen, the hospice nurse, kept strictly to her professional routine, but even she seemed to register the subtle shift in atmosphere. My sister's questions during visits were less about Grandma's comfort and more about access to different parts of the house. She wanted to know who had keys to which cabinets, whether aides were allowed to open certain drawers, and whether family members could check closets for safety reasons. Carmen answered every question in her usual professional tone and logged everything carefully into her tablet for the record. More than once, I walked into the bedroom and saw the nightstand drawer sitting half open, the notebook resting visibly on top of a stack of envelopes, with a pen lying uncapped beside it. Grandma would push the drawer shut as soon as she noticed me in the doorway and shift back into making small requests for water or another pillow. The order of the papers inside that drawer changed often enough that I stopped believing any of it was random. Bit by bit, a clear pattern began to rise through the everyday noise of caretaking and routine. My sister's unannounced drop-ins lined up perfectly with missing pieces of jewelry, with new speeches about the financial cost of maintaining the house, and with carefully worded questions that sounded rehearsed and scripted. The weaker Grandma's body became, the more deliberate and focused her attention seemed to grow, and I slowly found myself doing the exact same thing. The phone call from his office came on a weekday afternoon while I was working at my own kitchen table in Hartford. A calm male voice introduced himself as an attorney who had represented my grandmother for many years, and he said she had specifically asked him to speak with me alone about her estate before anything became public. I wrote down the address he gave me, a brick building located near the courthouse downtown, and agreed to meet him later that same week. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small conference room with one narrow window facing the street below. Shelves filled with organized files lined the wall behind the desk, the kind of quiet and meticulous order that comes from a lifetime spent managing paperwork. Across from me sat the man from the phone call, Walter Hoffman, a deliberate and measured person with gray hair and a habit of straightening the papers in front of him before he began speaking. He did not waste time warming me up with jokes or personal stories. He went over the basic facts of my grandmother's health in a steady and unhurried voice, naming the hospital where she had first been treated and the hospice agency that now sent Carmen to the house twice daily. He mentioned that he had been handling legal documents for my grandparents since before I was even born, and that he had been expecting this final round of planning ever since her diagnosis became terminal. Then, he slid a folder across the table toward me. He explained that my grandmother had recently signed an updated will at her home in the presence of two hospice staff members who had served as legal witnesses. One of them, a social worker named Ian Fletcher, was also a notary public licensed by the state. Their sworn statements, along with detailed medical notes and Carmen's daily logs, all confirmed beyond any doubt that my grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she signed each page. Inside the folder was a clean copy of the new will. My grandmother's handwriting at the bottom of the final page was the first thing I saw, and it stopped me cold. The text itself was dense and formal, but the structure was straightforward enough to follow. In this document, my grandmother, whose legal name was Dorothy Sullivan, left her house on the east side of Hartford, her savings accounts, and all personal property contained in that house to me. My name, Emma Sullivan, appeared across multiple sections that described in legal language who would receive what remained after final bills and expenses were paid. Mr. Hoffman directed my attention carefully to a short paragraph on the next page. It named my sister for the first time by her full legal name, Nicole Sullivan, and set aside a token amount for her of $15, written out completely in words. The sentence that followed explained clearly that this small amount was meant to show that she had not been accidentally forgotten or overlooked in the drafting process, but had been intentionally limited on purpose. For a long moment, I could only hear the sound of traffic passing by outside the window. The house I had been driving to almost every single day, the accounts my grandmother had quietly added to over the years, the drawers and boxes throughout the rooms that still held pieces of her entire life. All of it sat on the table in front of me in the form of a decision she had already carried out weeks ago. It did not feel like winning anything at all. It felt like undeniable proof that she had been watching everything all along. Mr. Hoffman let me sit with that realization for a moment before he filled in the rest of the story. He explained that the change to her had not been sudden or impulsive in any way. Months earlier, she had started telling him during their meetings that she was carefully tracking how different people were behaving around her. She had begun taking written notes in that small notebook, saving doorbell camera clips to her phone, and passing evidence to his office whenever she felt strong enough to work through the technology. He showed me a one-page statement written entirely in her handwriting that had been attached to the will as supporting documentation. In it, she wrote that she wanted her estate to reflect actions and behavior, not expectations or assumptions. She said she trusted the person who had stayed with her day after day simply because she was family, and did not trust those who spoke about the house as if it were already empty and she were already gone. She did not list names or repeat specific arguments in that statement. The dates and the supporting documents did that work for her. Only after we had gone through all the legal language together did he reach into his briefcase and take out a smaller envelope. My name was written across the front in her tight and careful script. He said she had written it herself on a day when her hands were steady enough to hold a pen properly, and had told him it was to be given to me only after I had seen the new will in its entirety. He had not read it himself, and he did not intend to. Before I left the office, he leaned back slightly in his chair and folded his hands on the desk. He told me to expect serious anger when the rest of the family eventually learned about these changes, especially from people who had already decided in their minds that the house and the money were theirs by default. He wanted me to know that the paperwork was solid and legally airtight, that witnesses and records were already in place and filed with the court, and that this was not some fragile decision that could be talked away or pressured into changing. Then he passed on one last request from my grandmother, the only part of her instructions that did not appear anywhere on paper. She wanted me to wait. Wait when people started twisting the story to suit themselves. Wait when someone claimed I had missed my chance or had been left out. Wait patiently until the moment came when the documents sitting on his desk would speak louder than anything my sister could possibly say. Grandma's body did not fail all at once in a dramatic collapse. It was more like the house grew quieter day by day until one afternoon the silence simply stayed and did not lift. She passed away on a gray morning while Carmen was carefully adjusting her medication dosage. The kind of ordinary and unremarkable moment that did not match the enormous weight of what it actually meant. By the time I arrived at the house, the paramedics had already come and gone. The bed was neatly made, her reading glasses were folded and resting on the nightstand, and the whiteboard by the refrigerator still listed pain medications she would never take again. My mother moved through those first few days as if she were walking underwater, speaking softly to people who called, accepting casserole dishes from neighbors, and nodding at logistical questions without really hearing what was being asked. My sister, on the other hand, stepped into the empty space left behind as if it had been waiting specifically for her to fill it. She took over phone calls with distant relatives, scheduled the funeral service at a church across town, chose the floral arrangements that would be displayed, and made absolutely sure that everyone in the family knew she was handling everything. I tried to be useful in the ways that did not require a clipboard or a phone constantly pressed to my ear. I drove my mother to the funeral home and sat beside her in silence while she signed papers she barely read. I sorted sympathy cards into neat stacks on Grandma's kitchen table and texted flight information back and forth to relatives traveling in from other states. Every time I opened a drawer or a closet in that house, I felt the painful absence of the woman who had known where every single object belonged. The day of the service, I arrived early at the church in Hartford and found my sister already standing at the entrance, directing ushers and adjusting the placement of the guest book. She wore a black dress that looked more like a work outfit than morning clothes, and she spoke to the pastor in firm and practiced phrases that sounded like she had rehearsed them. People naturally gravitated toward her during the reception. It was easier to orbit the person who projected certainty and control. When the family gathered afterward in the fellowship hall downstairs, conversations gradually shifted away from grief and toward practicalities. Someone asked what would happen with the house now. Another relative mentioned the will reading as if it were a scene from a movie instead of routine paperwork in a downtown office. My mother said quietly that the lawyer would go over everything soon, and my sister answered for her immediately, promising to coordinate a time that worked for everyone who needed to be present. 2 days later, my mother repeated that there would be a formal meeting at Mr. Hoffman's office. The date, she said, was already set for the following week, and my sister would confirm the exact hour once she talked to the staff. There was no reason for me to doubt that any of this would happen as described. Even knowing what lay in the folder I had already seen, I assumed the logistics would follow a normal and predictable pattern. A phone call from the office, a time marked on the calendar, a room where we would all be told the same thing at once. Instead, communication began to narrow in a way that felt deliberate. Messages started flowing through my sister, not around her. She told my mother she was in direct contact with the office and that they were trying to fit us into the schedule. She told distant relatives who called that she would let them know if their presence was actually needed. When I asked for specifics about timing, she brushed me off with a kind of vague answers that sound polite on the surface until you listen closely enough to realize they mean nothing. The day she claimed the will had been read, I did not know that yet. I was at home answering work emails at the same kitchen table where I had once watched Mr. Hoffman slide that folder toward me. My phone buzzed with my sister's name lighting up the screen. Her tone was light and casual in a way that never meant anything good. She informed me that the meeting had already happened without me, that the documents were already reviewed by everyone who mattered, and that the major decisions had been settled and finalized. She framed it as an unfortunate scheduling mix-up, a simple case of calendars not lining up properly. She blamed the office for having extremely limited availability and suggested that I should have been more proactive if I really wanted to be included in these discussions. Underneath the polite explanation sat the real message she wanted me to hear. I had missed my opportunity completely, and she was now positioned at the center of whatever came next. I listened without saying much, quietly remembering the signed pages in Mr. Hoffman's folder, the notary's official statement, and the way my grandmother's name had looked in that final careful script at the bottom of the page. The version of events my sister was selling did not match what I knew to be absolutely true, but it fit perfectly with the picture she wanted the rest of the family to see and believe. So I let her talk without correcting her. When she ended the call sounding completely satisfied with herself, I did not argue or explain. I just put the phone down on the table and waited exactly the way my grandmother had asked me to. A few days after my sister's confident and triumphant phone call, the certified envelope finally showed up. There was a delivery notice stuck to my front door and a message left on my phone about a document from Hoffman Legal waiting for pickup at the Main Street Post Office. That sender line on the notice told me more than any voicemail message could have. At the counter inside, I signed the form, took the thick envelope from the clerk, and opened it sitting in my parked car with the engine turned off. On top was a formal letter stating that my grandmother's updated will had been signed at her home in Hartford, witnessed by hospice staff members, and officially filed with the probate court. Behind it lay the will itself, printed cleanly on heavy paper. The terms matched exactly what I had already seen in Mr. Hoffman's office weeks earlier. After final expenses and debts were settled, the brick house on the east side, her savings accounts, and all personal contents of that house were left to me. Later in the document, in a short paragraph near the end, my sister's full legal name, Nicole Sullivan, appeared beside the amount of $15 written out completely in words, with a line of explanation stating clearly that the amount was intentional and deliberate. Reading it alone in my car, without legal small talk or explanations around me, made the choice feel even more deliberate and final. This was no private draft tucked away in a folder for discussion. This was the official version being mailed to everyone named in the document. That evening, my mother called to ask if I had received the packet in the mail. At her apartment, an identical envelope lay open on the coffee table in front of her. She had spread the pages out into neat piles, the way Grandma used to sort school forms and bills. She asked me to walk her through the important parts so she could understand what everything meant. I explained carefully how debts would be paid first, what would happen with the house and the accounts, and how the remainder would flow according to the instructions. When we reached the line about Nicole and that small symbolic figure of $15, my mother's shoulders visibly sank. She stared down at the paper in her hands, not at me, and said nothing at all for a long time. We were still sitting in that heavy quiet when the front door suddenly opened and my sister stepped inside without knocking. Her work badge was still clipped to her blazer, and her own envelope was folded in half and clutched tightly in one hand. The lazy triumph I had heard in her voice just days earlier was completely gone. Her face was tight, and her expression was flat and unreadable. She spoke quickly, stacking claims on top of each other without pausing. The will had to be wrong or forged. Grandma would never have cut out the daughter who handled everything responsibly. The witnesses might have been confused about what they were signing. The timing of the whole thing was deeply suspect and questionable. She floated the idea that Grandma had been too heavily medicated to understand what she was signing, and she suggested strongly that someone close to her must have unfairly steered the decision in their own favor. As she talked, legal phrases began to slip into her sentences, the kind of language that comes from search engines and office lunch conversations with coworkers who think they understand the law. Capacity, undue influence, grounds to contest, all of it delivered in a tone that demanded agreement. I did not argue with her about motive or fairness or who deserved what. I simply confirmed that the document existed, that hospice staff members had been present and watching, and that a licensed notary had signed and sealed everything according to state law. My mother watched the two of us like someone trying to stay upright on a floor that was moving beneath her feet. The next morning, Mr. Hoffman called. His voice was calm and almost businesslike, as if this were a routine matter he had expected. He let me know that Nicole, through an attorney she had hired, had filed a formal petition in probate court to challenge the validity of the will. He had scheduled a meeting for the following week so that her lawyer could review the records my grandmother had supplied to his office over the course of several months. He said I was not required to attend the meeting, but that I was absolutely welcome if I wanted to hear everything laid out at once in front of both sides. I told him I would be there without hesitation. When the day came, I sat once again in his small conference room above the street. A much taller stack of folders now rested in front of him on the desk. Nicole sat across the table beside a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as her attorney and opened a legal pad that was already marked up with notes and questions. I took a chair off to the side, close enough to hear every word clearly, but outside their direct line of focus. Her attorney began by outlining their legal position in careful detail. They intended to argue that our grandmother had not fully understood the will at the time of signing, and that someone close to her had exerted inappropriate influence over the changes that were made. Mr. Hoffman listened to the entire presentation without interrupting once, and then he calmly opened the first folder in the stack. He started with hospice records, daily notes describing my grandmother as alert and fully engaged during the afternoon hours when he had met with her at the house. He showed medication charts that documented when stronger drugs were administered and at what dosages. He presented a letter from the supervising physician confirming that on the specific days the documents were signed, she had full legal capacity to make decisions about her estate. Next came sworn statements from the 2 hospice staff members who had watched her sign at the dining table. One of them, Ian, who was also the notary, described in detail how my grandmother had repeated the key terms back to him in her own words before signing each individual page. Copies of the notary seal and identification checks sat neatly behind their statements in the file. Then he opened the file she had built herself over the course of many weeks. Printed still images from the doorbell camera showed Nicole arriving at the house on evenings when no one else was scheduled to be there, entering with a light tote bag over her shoulder, and leaving less than an hour later with the same bag hanging noticeably lower and heavier. A handwritten list in my grandmother's tight and precise script matched those specific times to items she had recorded as missing from her bedroom and from the jewelry box sitting on her dresser. Behind the list were receipts from nearby pawn shops documenting sales of pieces that matched her descriptions almost perfectly, down to the engravings and stones. The last page Mr. Hoffman placed on the table carried my grandmother's handwriting from top to bottom. In it, she wrote that she wanted her estate to reflect how people had actually shown up during her final months, that she trusted the person who had sat with her day after day without asking for anything in return, and that she no longer trusted the person who had treated her home like a prize to be claimed while she was still living there. When he finished presenting everything, the room went completely still. Nicole's attorney looked over his notes for a long moment, and then he closed the legal pad in front of him. In a quieter and much more measured tone, he said he would review everything again on his own time, but that in his professional view, any attempt to overturn the will would face serious and likely insurmountable obstacles. My sister gathered the petition papers she had brought with her, left the entire stack of evidence sitting where it was on the table, and walked out of the room without looking at me even once. The soft click of the door closing behind her sounded less like the start of a legal fight and more like the end of the story she had been trying to sell to everyone. In the weeks after that meeting, the legal part of everything ended long before the emotional part did. Mr. Hoffman called first with the update. Nicole's attorney had officially withdrawn the challenge, and the court had accepted the will as written and moved the case into routine probate processing. On paper, it was simple and straightforward. My grandmother's house on the east side of Hartford, her remaining savings accounts, and all the contents of that house passed to me without further contest. No paragraph in any legal document covered what it actually means when your own sister tried to force a different outcome and lost publicly. I did not see Nicole in person after that phone call. Group text messages shifted around without including me at first, and then eventually stopped showing up on my phone altogether. My mother started scheduling separate visits with each of us. Coffee with Nicole one day and quiet afternoons with me at the house the next. When relatives reached out to me, they were clearly testing which version of the story I would support and repeat. I stuck to facts without adding commentary. There was a valid will signed at home with witnesses present and medical records to back up every detail. I refused to add a softer or more forgiving story on top of that foundation just to make people more comfortable. Probate closed on an ordinary weekday without any drama. I signed transfer forms in Mr. Hoffman's office and left with a folder that said in dry legal language that the estate of Dorothy Sullivan was officially settled. After that, the key I had been using at my grandmother's door was no longer borrowed or temporary. It simply belonged to me. Moving into the house happened slowly and in small steps rather than all at once. I stayed over when sorting through papers ran late into the evening, and then I started keeping clothes in the closet upstairs, and then I let my lease at my old apartment expire without bothering to renew it. One afternoon, I realized that everything that actually mattered to me was already under this roof, and that my old apartment existed only as an address on forms I needed to update. Inside the house, I changed very little. Her bed stayed exactly where it was by the window. Her kitchen table became my desk for work. The nightstand still held her reading glasses and a half-used bottle of lotion that I could not bring myself to throw away. I added a lamp and my laptop and left everything else exactly as it had been. The place did not feel like a prize I had won in a fight. It felt like a trust one was expected to maintain and protect. Later on, while digging through a drawer looking for my passport, I found the sealed envelope that Mr. Hoffman had given me. My name sat in the center in her careful script. I opened it slowly while sitting at the dining table. The letter inside was short and written in her voice. She wrote about ordinary things I had done without thinking much about them. Shoveling her front steps before heading to work, dropping off groceries when she could not drive anymore, sitting with her on nights when no one else came by to visit. She said that growing old had not made her confused or weak-minded, just quieter than she used to be, and that quiet people see far more than anyone guesses because others eventually stop pretending in front of them. Near the end of the letter, she wrote that not everyone who shares your blood has earned the right to shape your future, and that saying no to that kind of pressure is not betrayal. It is self-respect. I folded the page carefully and slid it into the journal she had kept near her bed. It felt like the last piece of her that had been meant only for me. News about Nicole reached me in fragments over the following months. A cousin mentioned in passing that coworkers at her firm knew there had been a little dispute in the family and that she had lost. Another relative said she arrived late to family gatherings now and left early without saying much to anyone. I did not ask for more information or updates. I told my mother to let me know if Nicole was ever in real trouble or needed help, and otherwise to leave my name out of their conversations entirely. My choice about her stayed simple and clear. I did not send angry messages demanding explanations or apologies. I did not leak documents or repeat my grandmother's words as ammunition in arguments. I have no plan to rebuild whatever relationship we used to have before all of this happened. I let contact fade naturally. Whatever reflection Nicole had to do about who she had been at our grandmother's bedside during those final months would be between her and her own conscience, not between her and me. Living in my grandmother's house turned into its own kind of answer to everything that had happened. Paying bills on time, fixing things when they broke, and saying yes when neighbors needed a hand with something felt like the clearest way to honor the person who had watched everything carefully and still decided I should have the keys. On nights when the house settled into familiar creaks and sounds, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and her journal open beside me, and the whole story looked less like a feud between sisters and more like a simple ledger of actions and their natural outcomes. If there is a lesson anywhere in this story, it is that you do not have to destroy someone completely to let consequences reach them. My grandmother did the quiet work of writing down what she saw happening around her. The law turned that careful documentation into signatures and court orders. I refused to pretend that none of it had happened just because pretending would have been easier for the family and more comfortable for everyone involved. Nicole will decide on her own what to do with the fallout that followed her choices. I decided not to carry it for her.